The dust cloud appeared just after noon, cutting across the flat horizon like a scar. Clara saw it from the porch, where she'd been standing for the better part of an hour, one hand shading her eyes, the other resting on the worn railing her father had built before the fever took him. 3 months dead now. 3 months of watching the ranch fall apart around her like a house built on sand. The writer was early. A full day early, if the letter had been honest about timing, and in Clara's experience, very little about this arrangement had inspired confidence. She didn't go inside to change, didn't pin up her hair or straighten the collar of her work shirt, stained with mud from trying to dig out the irrigation ditch that morning. A failed effort. The creek had been running thin since May, and it was only getting worse. If this marriage didn't work, if this man turned out to be as useless as she feared, she'd be selling by autumn. Selling, or worse. The Rourkes would make sure it was worse. The horse came into focus first. A gray mare, well kept, stepping carefully over the uneven ground. Then the man. Clara had prepared herself for someone old. The matchmaker in Santa Fe had been vague about details, but the arrangement itself suggested desperation on both sides. Men with prospects didn't answer advertisements for failing ranches in the middle of nowhere. This man wasn't old. He was maybe 30, lean in the way men got when they spent more time working than eating, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't so carefully blank. He rode like he'd done it his whole life, easy, controlled, aware of everything around him without seeming to look directly at anything. Clara felt something cold move through her stomach. This wasn't some broken-down widower looking for a soft place to land. This was someone else entirely. He reined in about 10 feet from the porch, eyes moving across the property in a slow sweep. The house, 2 rooms and a loft badly needing paint. The barn, sagging on one side where the support beam had rotted through. The empty corral. The fields beyond, brown and cracked. When his gaze finally landed on her, it was direct and unnervingly calm. "Clara Whitlock?" His voice was lower than she'd expected, rough-edged, like he didn't use it often. "That's right." She kept her tone flat. "You're early. Roads were better than I thought." He swung down from the saddle with the kind of practiced efficiency that made the movement look effortless. Up close, she could see the details. The gun on his hip, worn but clean. The scar cutting through his left eyebrow. The way he held himself, not aggressive, but not soft either. Alert. "You're Ethan Cross." It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. "I am." A silence opened up between them, awkward and sharp-edged. Clara had played this moment through her head 100 times in the last 2 weeks, practiced different versions of what she'd say. All of it disappeared now, faced with this stranger who was supposed to become her husband in a matter of hours. "You want to see the property first?" she asked finally. Before the minister comes." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "That's not how this usually works. Nothing about this is usual." "Fair enough." He looped the mare's reins over the railing. "Show me." She took him through it honestly. Didn't dress anything up or make excuses. Showed him the well that was running lower each week, the fences that needed replacing, the irrigation system her father had built that was failing in 3 different places. Showed him the herd, what was left of it. 23 cattle where there should have been 60. "Sold them?" he asked. "Some. Lost more than I should have." She didn't elaborate. Didn't mention the 3 that had been found shot through the head in the north pasture, or the fence that kept getting cut in the same spot no matter how many times she repaired it. He'd figure it out soon enough if he stayed. When he stayed. They walked the eastern boundary, where the land butted up against Rourke property. Ethan stopped at the fence line, studying the dirt on the other side. "How many head do they run?" 200, maybe more now." Clara kicked at a broken fence post. "They've been buying up everything around here for the last 5 years. My father wouldn't sell. Now they're waiting me out." "How patient are they?" "Not very." Ethan crouched down, running his fingers over a spot where the fence wire had been cleanly cut and clumsily retied. "Recent. Last week." He stood, brushing dirt off his hands, and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You know what you're getting into, bringing someone else into this?" "A partner." That's what the arrangement said. "Partners get killed same as anyone else." "Then I guess we'd better not get killed." Clara met his eyes, refusing to look away first. You having second thoughts? Should I be? Probably. She was surprised by her own honesty. This isn't what the advertisement said. The ranch is worse than I described. The water situation is worse. The neighbors are worse. You want to ride back to Santa Fe? I won't hold it against you. For a long moment, he didn't respond. Just stood there studying her face like he was trying to solve a problem that didn't have an easy answer. What do you need? He asked finally. The question caught her off guard. What? To keep this place running. What do you need? Clara almost laughed. The list was so long she didn't know where to start. Time, water, money I don't have, about 40 more cattle, someone who knows how to fix an irrigation system that hasn't worked right since my father had his stroke. A miracle, probably. I can't do much about miracles, Ethan said, but I know irrigation. Used to work a property up north that had the same problems. Might be able to jury rig something that'll hold until we can afford proper repairs. We. He'd said we. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. The first crack in the wall of certainty she'd built around her own failure. The minister's coming at 4, she said quietly. That gives you 3 hours to change your mind. I won't. You don't know that. Yeah, Ethan said, and this time he did smile. Just barely, just enough to change his whole face. I do, Guillaume. The ceremony was brief and graceless. Reverend Matthews had made the ride from town, a sour-faced man in his 60s who clearly disapproved of the entire arrangement, but needed the fee too much to say so. He stood in Clara's front room, their front room now, she supposed, and rattled through the words with the enthusiasm of someone reading a livestock inventory. Clara wore the same work clothes she'd had on all day. Ethan had at least changed into a clean shirt, though he'd kept the gun on his hip. She noticed Matthews eyeing it but saying nothing. The vows were traditional. The kiss was not, just a brief, awkward brush of lips that felt more like a handshake than anything romantic. When it was done, Matthews handed them the certificate, collected his payment, and left without offering congratulations. Well, Clara said into the silence that followed. That's done. Ethan was studying the certificate like it might contain hidden information. You want me to take the barn? Let you keep the house to yourself? She'd been expecting this, some version of maintaining separation, keeping things professional, but standing there in the dimming light, watching this stranger who was now legally her husband trying to give her space she hadn't asked for, Clara felt a sudden spike of irritation. We're married, she said flatly, not business partners filing joint taxes. You can sleep in the house. There's a room upstairs that was my father's. I already moved his things out. Clara, don't. She cut him off, suddenly exhausted. Don't make this more complicated than it has to be. This is a working arrangement. We both know that. But we don't have to pretend we're strangers. And I don't need you sleeping in a barn that's half collapsed. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. Good. She moved toward the kitchen, needing something to do with her hands. You eat yet? Not since this morning. I'll make something. Dinner was simple. Bread, beans, salt pork that was older than she would have liked. They ate in relative silence, the kind of careful quiet between people still learning how to exist in the same space. Clara kept glancing at him when she thought he wasn't looking, trying to reconcile the reality of this stranger across from her with the imagined figure she'd been building in her head for weeks. He caught her looking once and raised an eyebrow. What? Nothing, she said quickly. Just, you're younger than I expected. You're younger than I expected, too. He pushed beans around his plate. The advertisement didn't mention your age. Would it have mattered? Might have. Why? Ethan set down his fork, considering the question seriously. Because young means inexperienced, and I figured anyone desperate enough to marry a stranger was probably desperate for a reason. Old meant widow, maybe. Young meant something else. Something harder to fix. Clara bristled. I'm not broken. Didn't say you were. His tone was mild, but his eyes were sharp. Just said you were in a hard spot. There's a difference. She wanted to argue, but couldn't find the angle. He wasn't wrong. What about you? What's your excuse? For answering the advertisement? For needing to. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was careful, measured. I was a sheriff, up in Colorado. Made some choices that didn't sit well with the people I worked for. Got told to leave before things got ugly. What kind of choices? The kind where you have to decide whether the law matters more than the people enforcing it. He met her eyes. I picked wrong, according to them. Clara absorbed this, trying to understand what he wasn't saying. You on the run? No, left clean, but my reputation followed me anyway. A pause. Hard to find work when people think you can't follow orders. Can you? Depends on the orders. She almost smiled. That's not reassuring. Wasn't trying to be. Ethan pushed back from the table. Look, I know this is strange, for both of us. But I meant what I said earlier. I can help with this place. I'm good with my hands, good with animals, and I know how to work. What I don't know, I'll learn. That enough for now? Clara looked at him. Really looked. At the tiredness around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like someone expecting trouble. He wasn't that different from her, she realized. Just another person trying to stay afloat in water that kept getting deeper. Yeah, she said quietly. That's enough. Chat. The first week was careful and strange. They moved around each other like dancers learning a new routine, constantly aware of where the other person was, trying not to step on toes. Ethan took the upstairs room as promised, kept his things organized and out of the way. He rose before dawn each morning, worked until dark, and spoke only when necessary. But he did work. Hard. Clara watched him tear apart the irrigation system her father had built, laying out every piece in organized rows across the yard. He studied it for hours, sketching diagrams in the dirt, before finally starting to rebuild it with modifications she didn't fully understand but hoped would help. He fixed the barn door that had been sticking for months, reinforced the corral fence, started plans for a new chicken coop after finding what was left of hers. Feathers and blood scattered across the yard one morning. They didn't talk about who was responsible, didn't need to. On the 8th day, Clara woke to voices outside. She grabbed her father's rifle, her rifle now, and moved to the window carefully. 2 men on horses, both unfamiliar, talking to Ethan in the yard. From the tension in his posture, this wasn't a friendly visit. She was out the door before conscious thought caught up, rifle held low but ready. The men saw her and smiled, not friendly. One was older, maybe 50, with a thick beard going gray. The other was younger, stockier, with mean little eyes that lingered on her in a way that made her skin crawl. Mrs. Cross, the older one said, voice mockingly polite. Congratulations on the marriage. Your father would be so proud. Clara stopped a few feet behind Ethan, close enough to provide support, but not so close she'd be in the way if things went wrong. You're on my property. State your business or leave. Just being neighborly. He shifted in the saddle, leather creaking. Wanted to welcome your new husband. Let him know how things work around here. I know how things work, Ethan said quietly. Do you? The younger one leaned forward, grinning. Because it seems like maybe you don't. Otherwise, you wouldn't be wasting time on a dried-up piece of land that's been dead for months. Clara felt Ethan's posture shift. Subtle, but present. The land's fine. For now. The older man's smile didn't waver. But water's getting scarce. And when it runs out completely, well, might be time to consider more practical options. We've made Mrs. Cross a very generous offer. Several times, in fact. And I've refused, Clara said coldly. Several times. Your father's stubbornness passed down. Shame. He looked at Ethan. You seem like a practical man, Mr. Cross. Man of experience. Maybe you can talk sense into your wife. Help her see that some fights aren't worth having. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Ethan moved, not fast, not threatening, just a subtle shift that changed the entire energy of the moment. His hand rested on his gun, casual and deliberate. Appreciate the advice, he said, voice flat. Now get off our property. The younger man's grin disappeared. You don't want to make enemies of us. Don't need to make you anything. You're already here. Ethan's expression didn't change. But you're leaving now. And you're not coming back unless invited. For a moment, Clara thought it would escalate. Saw the calculation in the older man's eyes, weighing options, considering whether pushing now was worth the risk. Then he smiled again, cold and humorless. We'll be seeing you, he said, and wheeled his horse around. The younger one followed, but not before spitting in the dirt at Ethan's feet. They didn't speak until the riders disappeared over the ridge. That was the Rourkes? Ethan asked. Two of them. There's a third brother, Patrick. He's worse. Worse how? Smarter, meaner, less interested in talking. Clara lowered the rifle, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. You just made enemies. Had them already. He turned to look at her. Moment I signed that certificate. This isn't your fight. It is now. Ethan's voice was matter of fact. No drama, no bravado, just a statement of reality. You need to understand something. I didn't come here looking for easy. I came here because I needed a place to stand. This is that place. That means when someone threatens it, they threaten me. Simple as that. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he didn't owe her this, that marriage certificate or not, he could still walk away. But looking at his face, she understood he wouldn't. This wasn't about obligation or even loyalty. It was about something more fundamental. The kind of line you drew in yourself that you didn't cross, regardless of consequences. All right, she said finally, but we do this smart. No heroics, no standing in the open waiting to get shot. Agreed. He glanced toward the house. We need to talk about defenses, and about how much ammunition you have. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the house settle around her, to the unfamiliar sounds of another person living in the space that had been hers alone for months. Footsteps overhead, the creak of floorboards, water running in the basin. This stranger was her husband now, legal, binding, real. The thought should have terrified her more than it did. Instead, lying there in the dark, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced since her father's death. She wasn't alone. Whatever was coming, and something was definitely coming, she wouldn't face it by herself. It wasn't love, wasn't even close. But it was something. And for now, that had to be enough. The problem started small. A broken fence here, cattle straying onto Rourke land there, tools going missing from the barn. Nothing that couldn't be explained away as bad luck or poor maintenance, but the pattern was clear. Ethan started sleeping lighter, waking at odd hours to check the property. Clara joined him sometimes, the two of them walking the fence lines in the pre-dawn darkness, looking for signs of tampering. On the 14th day, they found the dead calf. It was in the north pasture near the property line. Throat cut clean, body still warm. Deliberately killed and left where they'd find it. Clara stood over it, feeling something cold and hard settle in her chest. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was a promise. We report this? Ethan asked quietly. To who? Sheriff Dalton? She laughed, bitter. He's been in the Rourke's pocket for years. We report it. Best case, he does nothing. Worst case, he finds a way to blame us. So we just take it. We survive it. Clara forced herself to look away from the calf. And we get smarter. They buried the animal and said nothing to anyone. But that night, Ethan moved supplies into the house. Ammunition, weapons, anything that could be used defensively. He showed Clara how to load the shotgun faster, how to aim from behind cover, how to shoot to wound rather than scare. You ever kill anyone? She asked during one of these sessions. He was quiet for a long moment. Yes. In the line of duty? Mostly. She waited for more, but he didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. That mostly told her everything necessary about who Ethan Cross had been before he'd arrived here. You regret it? She asked. Which part? Any of it. Ethan set down the revolver he'd been cleaning, meeting her eyes directly. I regret the circumstances that made it necessary, not the choices themselves. You do what you have to do to survive. Anything else is luxury. It should have frightened her, this calm acceptance of violence, this readiness to hurt or be hurt. Instead, Clara felt a strange sense of recognition, like meeting someone who spoke the same language you did, in a place where everyone else was talking in foreign tongues. I've never shot anyone, she said quietly. Don't know if I could. You could, he said it with absolute certainty. When the moment comes, you won't think. You'll just do what needs doing. How do you know? Because you're still here. Ethan gestured around them, at the struggling ranch, the hostile territory, the impossible situation. Most people would have given up by now. Run, sold, quit. You didn't. That tells me everything I need to know about what you're capable of. Later, lying awake again, Clara turned those words over in her mind, trying to decide if they were comfort or warning, trying to decide if there was a difference. 3 weeks into the marriage, the irrigation system finally started working. Clara stood in the field watching water, actual flowing water, spread through the channels Ethan had rebuilt, and felt something break inside her chest. It wasn't enough to save everything, but it was enough to save something, enough to fight for. She turned and found him watching her with an expression she was learning to recognize. Careful approval, like someone afraid to celebrate too soon. "It'll hold?" she asked. "Through summer, at least. After that," he shrugged. "We'll see." "We'll see," was becoming their shared philosophy. A refusal to make promises neither of them could keep, but also a stubborn insistence on possibility. That night, for the first time, they sat on the porch together after dark. Not working, not planning, just existing in the same space without purpose or urgency. "You miss it?" Clara asked after a long silence. "Being sheriff?" Ethan considered the question. "I miss knowing what I was supposed to do. Clear rules, clear authority. This," he gestured vaguely at the darkness, "is muddier." "Is that worse?" "Don't know yet." He glanced at her. "What about you? You ever think about leaving before all this?" "Every day," she admitted. "When my father was sick, when he died, every time I looked at the accounts and did the math." A pause. "But I never did." "Why not?" Clara tried to find words for something she'd never articulated, even to herself. "Because leaving felt like admitting defeat. Like saying everything my father built didn't matter, that I didn't matter." She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "Stupid, probably." "No," Ethan said quietly. "Not stupid." They sat in silence after that, watching the stars emerge one by one over the darkened land. And for just that moment, that single, fragile moment, it felt almost peaceful. The peace lasted exactly 2 more days. Then the barn burned. Clara smelled the smoke before she saw the flames. She jerked awake in the darkness, heart already pounding, some animal part of her brain recognizing danger before consciousness caught up. The acrid scent was thick in the air, seeping through the walls. And when she threw back the covers and stumbled to the window, her worst fear materialized in orange and red. The barn was an inferno. "Ethan!" She was running before she finished shouting his name, bare feet hitting the cold floor, grabbing for clothes in the dark. She heard him moving upstairs, fast footsteps, then thundering down the stairs. They collided in the hallway. His face was stark in the flickering light coming through the windows. "The horses," Clara gasped. "I'll get them. You grab buckets, anything that holds water." They split without another word. Clara ran for the kitchen, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the pump handle. Behind her, she heard the front door slam, heard Ethan's voice cutting through the night air, sharp commands to the animals, trying to stay calm while the world burned around them. The mare came first, wild-eyed and fighting, nearly trampling Ethan as he dragged her toward the corral. Then the gelding her father had bought 3 years ago, the one that had always been steady, now bucking and screaming in terror. By the time Clara got outside with the first bucket, the heat was already unbearable. Flames were climbing the walls, eating through wood that hadn't seen proper maintenance in months, racing across the roof like something alive and hungry. "It's too far gone!" Ethan shouted over the roar. He was trying to pull equipment from the near side, harnesses, tools, anything within reach that wasn't already burning. "We can't save it!" Clara knew he was right, knew it with the sick certainty that came from watching her father's life work turn to ash in front of her eyes. But she couldn't just stand there. Couldn't just watch it happen without fighting back. She threw the water anyway, a useless gesture against an immense destruction, the liquid evaporating before it even hit the flames. Then another bucket. And another. Her arms burned with the effort, her lungs filling with smoke, tears streaming down her face, though whether from the fire or grief, she couldn't tell. Strong hands caught her wrists after the 5th bucket. "Clara, stop!" Ethan's voice was rough, ragged, from smoke. "It's gone. We have to... It's gone," he repeated, more firmly this time. "And if we stay here, we'll go with it." He pulled her back toward the house, half carrying her when she stumbled. They collapsed on the porch together, both coughing, both filthy with ash and soot, watching the barn collapse in on itself with a sound like thunder. The fire burned for hours. They sat there through all of it, not speaking, until the sun started to rise over what was left, Just a skeletal frame and smoking rubble, everything else consumed. Clara's voice came out hoarse and broken. They did this. It wasn't a question. Ethan didn't treat it like one. Yeah. You saw them? No. But I heard horses, 3 riders, maybe 4. They were gone by the time I got outside. He wiped soot from his face, leaving dark streaks. This was planned. They used something to make it catch fast, probably kerosene. Wanted to make sure it couldn't be stopped. Clara felt something cold and hard settle deeper in her chest, pushing past the grief into territory she'd never occupied before. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was war. What do we do? She asked quietly. Ethan was silent for a long time, staring at the ruins. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. We decide how far we're willing to go. What does that mean? It means they've escalated, which means we have to decide if we match them or if we walk away while we still can. Clara looked at him sharply. You want to leave? I want to know what you want. He met her eyes, his own red-rimmed from smoke. This is your land, your fight. I'll stand with you either way, but if we stay, if we push back, it's going to get worse before it gets better. People are going to get hurt, maybe killed. You need to be clear about what you're choosing. The question hung between them in the gray morning light. Clara thought about her father, about his stubborn refusal to sell even when it would have been easier, about his belief that some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight was unwinnable. She'd always thought it was pride, foolish, destructive pride. Now, sitting in the ashes of what he'd built, she understood it differently. It wasn't about pride. It was about refusing to let fear make your decisions for you, about drawing a line and saying, not one step further. We stay, she said, and we fight back. Ethan nodded slowly, like this was the answer he'd expected, but needed to hear anyway. Then we're going to need help. We can't do this alone. Who's going to help us? Everyone around here either works for the Rourkes or is too scared to cross them. Not everyone. He stood, brushing ash from his pants. There's other ranchers in the same position you were in. Small operations, barely holding on. The Rourkes have been picking them off one by one, buying them out, squeezing them until they have no choice. But if we could get them organized, they won't unite, Clara interrupted. My father tried that years ago. Everyone was too worried about protecting their own interests. Your father tried before someone burned down his barn in the middle of the night. Ethan's voice was quiet but pointed. That changes the calculation. Makes people realize that keeping your head down doesn't keep you safe. Clara wanted to argue, but couldn't find the angle. He was right. The rules had changed. The Rourkes had made sure of that. Even if we could get them together, she said slowly. What then? We don't have enough guns or ammunition to fight the Rourkes head on. They've got 20 men at least, all experienced, all loyal. We'd be slaughtered. Not if we're smart about it. Ethan started walking toward the smoking ruins, and Clara followed. He stood at the edge of what had been the barn, studying it like a crime scene. They came in the middle of the night, hit us when we were vulnerable, then disappeared before we could respond. That's the strategy. Quick strikes, psychological warfare, keeping us off balance. So we stop playing defense. We make them worry about protecting their own operation for once. He turned to face her. But we need numbers. Need people willing to stand watch, coordinate, cover each other's blind spots. That's what I meant about getting the other ranchers involved. It's not about outgunning them. It's about making ourselves too difficult to pick off quietly. Clara processed this, trying to see the shape of what he was proposing. You're talking about forming a militia. I'm talking about mutual defense. Same thing your father wanted, but with better motivation. Ethan kicked at a piece of charred wood. The Rourkes operate on fear. They count on people being isolated, too scared to work together. We break that pattern. We break their advantage. It made sense in a brutal, practical way, but Clara could already see the problems. Who do we start with, she asked. The Hendersons. Their place is about 8 miles south. They lost half their herd last month, officially to disease, but I heard talk in town that suggested otherwise. He looked at her. You know them? I know Mary Henderson. Her husband died 2 years ago. She's been running the place with her 2 sons. She's still there? As of last week, yes. Then that's where we start. Ethan headed toward the house. Get cleaned up. We'll ride out this afternoon. They're not going to trust us. Probably not, he agreed. But they'll trust the fact that the same people who came after you are coming after them. And right now, that's enough. They spent the morning salvaging what they could from the barn wreckage. It wasn't much. A few tools that had somehow survived, some tack that had been hanging far enough from the main blaze. Everything else was gone. Feed for the animals, spare lumber, 3 months' worth of supplies Clara had been stockpiling. All of it reduced to ash and memory. While they worked, neighbors started appearing. Not to help, to watch. To confirm what they'd already heard through whatever grapevine carried news in this empty territory. Clara saw them in the distance, saw them pause and look, saw them decide that getting involved wasn't worth the risk. Only one person actually approached. Thomas Garrett, who owned the feed store in town and had been friendly with her father. He rode up slowly, his weathered face creased with something that might have been sympathy. "Clara, I heard about what happened. I'm sorry." "Are you?" The words came out harsher than she'd intended, but she didn't take them back. Garrett flinched slightly. "I know you're angry." "Do you?" Clara straightened, wiping sweat and soot from her forehead. "Because from where I'm standing, everyone's very sorry about what's happening to me, but no one's willing to do anything about it. It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple." She heard the edge in her own voice, recognized it as her father's stubbornness coming through. The Rourkes are burning people out, stealing land, making it impossible for anyone to survive who doesn't bend to them. And everyone just watches because it's easier than fighting back. Garrett's face hardened. "You think it's easy? Watching people lose everything? You think I like what's happening? I think you like it better than putting yourself at risk." The silence that followed was sharp and uncomfortable. Ethan, who'd been working nearby, stopped and looked over but didn't intervene. "Your father said the same thing to me," Garrett said finally, quietly. "Right before he died, called me a coward for not standing with him." "And were you?" "Yeah." The admission seemed to cost him something. "I was. Still am, I guess. I've got a wife and 3 kids who depend on me. Can't fight a war I know I'll lose." Clara felt her anger drain away, replaced by something colder and more tired. "Then why are you here?" "Because I wanted you to know." He paused, searching for words. "I can't fight with you, but I won't fight against you either. If you need supplies, I'll extend credit. If you need information about who's buying what or saying what in town, I'll pass it along. It's not much, but it's what I can offer." It was more than nothing, maybe not much more, but enough to matter. "Thank you," Clara said, meaning it. Garrett nodded, then looked past her to the ruins. "They're getting bolder. Used to be they'd at least pretend there were accidents. Now they don't bother." "What changed?" "You did, or more specifically, him." Garrett gestured toward Ethan. "The Rourkes don't like wild cards, don't like not knowing what someone's capable of. Your husband's got a reputation that preceded him, stories from Colorado about a lawman who wouldn't bend. That makes them nervous." Clara glanced at Ethan, who'd gone very still. "What kind of stories?" "The kind that end with dead men and empty jails." Garrett's tone was carefully neutral. "I'm not judging, just saying, the Rourkes know what they're dealing with now, and they're not the type to wait and see what happens. They'll hit harder and faster to try to break you before you get organized." "Let them try," Ethan said quietly. Garrett studied him for a moment, then shook his head. "I hope you know what you're doing." After he left, Clara turned to Ethan. "You going to tell me about Colorado?" "Not much to tell that you couldn't figure out yourself." "Try me anyway." He sighed, setting down the tool he'd been holding. "I was sheriff in a town called Ridgeway. Mining community. Lots of money flowing through. Lots of people trying to control where it flowed. I arrested the wrong person, son of the man who basically owned half the territory. Judge let him go. I arrested him again. Same result. 3rd time, I was told to leave him alone or find a new job." "And you didn't leave him alone?" "No." Ethan's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "He'd killed 2 people by then. Everyone knew it. But he had protection, so it didn't matter. I decided it should matter." "What did you do?" "Got evidence that would stick. Arrested him properly, by the book, with witnesses and documentation. Made it impossible for the judge to dismiss it without looking completely bought." He paused. "It worked. He went to prison. But his father made sure I never worked as a lawman again. Spread word that I was insubordinate, unreliable, had a problem with authority. Didn't matter that it wasn't true. What mattered was that no one would hire someone who'd proven they couldn't be controlled. Clara absorbed this, trying to reconcile it with the careful, controlled man she'd come to know over the past few weeks. You regret it? Doing the right thing? No. He met her eyes. But I regret the cost. Not just to me, to the people who depended on me. When I left, the new sheriff was someone who could be controlled, and the problems I'd been trying to fix just got worse. That's not your fault, isn't it? His smile was bitter. I made a choice that felt good in the moment, but didn't actually solve anything in the long run, just created new problems for different people. So what are you doing here, Clara asked, making the same mistake again? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. Maybe. Or maybe I'm trying to do it better this time. Not just fight, win. Actually change something instead of just making a point. And if we can't win, then at least we tried. That's more than most people can say. They rode out to the Henderson place in the afternoon, taking the long way around to avoid Rourke Land. The sun was brutal, beating down on already scorched earth, and both horses moved sluggishly in the heat. Mary Henderson's ranch was smaller than Clara's had been, just a modest house and a single barn with maybe 50 acres of usable land. But it was kept up better, everything neat and organized in a way that spoke of constant attention and care. Mary herself appeared on the porch before they'd finished dismounting, a rifle held loose but ready in her hands. She was in her 40s, gray threading through dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, with a face weathered by sun and work. "Clara Whitlock," she said, not lowering the rifle. "Heard you got married. This him?" "Ethan Cross," Claire confirmed. "We need to talk to you, Mary. It's important." "Talk's cheap. What do you want?" Straight to the point. Claire appreciated that. "Same thing you do, to keep our land without getting killed for it." Mary's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. "You heard about my cattle." "I heard the official story. I'm guessing there's another version." "There always is." Mary finally lowered the rifle, though she didn't set it aside. "Found them poisoned. All 12 head I had left. Water trough was contaminated with something. Never figured out what. My son spent 2 days burying them." "The Rourkes? Who else?" Bitterness leaked through Mary's controlled tone. "But can't prove it. Sheriff came out, looked around, said it was probably bad feed, offered to file a report that wouldn't go anywhere." She looked between them. "So unless you've got proof I don't, you're wasting your time." "We don't need proof," Ethan said. "We need alliance." "Against who? The Rourkes?" Mary laughed, sharp and humorless. "You're either brave or stupid. Maybe both. They burned our barn last night," Clara said. "Middle of the night, soaked it in kerosene, made sure it went up fast. We barely got the horses out." The laughter died. Mary's face went hard. "Anyone hurt?" "No, but that's not the point. The point is they're escalating. It's not just economic pressure anymore. It's direct attacks. And if they'll do it to us, they'll do it to you. To everyone who won't sell." "So what?" Mary's voice was tired. "I should fight back? With what? I've got 2 boys who barely know which end of a gun to point and enough ammunition for maybe one good firefight. Against the Rourke brothers and their entire crew, that's not a fight, that's suicide." "Not if we're organized," Ethan said. "Not if we coordinate. Watch each other's backs, share intelligence. Make it too costly for them to pick us off one by one." Mary studied him with sharp, intelligent eyes. "You were law." "Was." "Why'd you stop?" "Because the law didn't work anymore. Same reason you can't call the sheriff now and expect help." She seemed to accept this. "And you think what? We form some kind of militia? Go to war with the most powerful family in the territory?" "I think we defend ourselves," Ethan corrected. "There's a difference. We're not attacking them. We're making it clear that coming after us has consequences." "Words," Mary said dismissively. "Pretty words that don't mean much when you're bleeding out in your own dirt." Clara stepped forward. "My father thought the same thing you do. That keeping quiet and hoping for the best was the smart play. He died anyway, worn down by stress and sabotage until his body just gave out. And you know what I learned from that? Quiet doesn't save you. Being reasonable doesn't save you. The only thing that might save you is refusing to make it easy for them." The silence stretched out. Mary looked past them, toward her own property, her own vulnerable position. Clara could see the calculation happening, the weighing of risks, the assessment of odds. "Who else is with you?" Mary asked finally. "No one yet," Clara admitted. "You're the first person we've asked." "So you want me to be your test case, see if it works before committing others?" "We want you to be our partner," Ethan said. "Equal voice, equal risk, equal benefit if we succeed." "And if we don't succeed?" "Then at least we go down fighting instead of waiting to be picked off." Mary was quiet for a long time. Then she called toward the house. "James, Michael, come out here." Two young men emerged, late teens, early 20s, with their mother's sharp features and their late father's broad shoulders. They looked nervous, but trying hard to hide it. "These people say the Rourkes are getting ready to move on everyone who hasn't sold," Mary said. "Say we should organize, defend ourselves together, instead of dying separately." She looked at her sons. "What do you think?" The older one, James, Clara thought, spoke first. "I think we don't have much choice. We stay scattered, we're dead. We work together, we might have a chance." "Might," Mary repeated. "Might isn't much to bet your life on." "Neither is sitting here waiting for them to poison our water again," the younger one, Michael, said. "Or burn us out like they did to Clara." Mary's expression suggested she'd already made her decision before asking their opinion, but needed to hear them voice support. That told Clara something about how the Henderson Ranch worked. Collective decision-making, even when the matriarch clearly led. "All right," Mary said finally. "We're in. But I want details. Plans. Not just intentions. How are we organizing this? Who's in charge? What happens when someone doesn't follow through?" Ethan smiled, the first real smile Clara had seen from him since the barn burned. "That's exactly what we need to figure out." They spent the next 3 hours planning in Mary's kitchen, spreading out a rough map of the territory on the worn table. Mary knew the area better than either of them, could name every small rancher, every struggling operation, every potential ally or definite enemy. "The Jacobsons," she said, pointing to a spot northeast of Clara's land. "Peter and Sarah. They've been here longer than anyone, 30 years at least. Proud people. Won't admit they're in trouble, but they are. Lost their youngest son last year, and the oldest moved to Denver. It's just the two of them now trying to work 300 acres. "Will they help?" Clara asked. "Depends how you ask. Peter's got pride enough for 10 men. You come at him like you're offering charity, he'll throw you off his land. But if you make it clear you need him, that his experience matters, he might listen." Ethan made a note. "Who else?" "The Reeves family. They run sheep instead of cattle, which already makes them outsiders. But they've had problems with the Rourkes too. Fences cut, ewes going missing. Father's a drunk, but the daughter, Anna, basically runs the operation. Smart girl. If you can convince her, the rest will follow." The list grew. 12 families in total, all struggling, all vulnerable, all with reasons to hate the Rourkes, but too scared or stubborn to do anything about it alone. "This is good," Ethan said, studying the map. "If we can get even half of these people on board, we've got a real chance at making this work." "You keep saying make this work," Mary said. "But what exactly is this? What's the actual plan beyond everyone agreeing to help each other?" It was the right question, the one they'd been dancing around. Ethan leaned back, considering. "Short term, we establish a warning system, riders positioned to spot trouble and alert the others. Someone sees Rourke men heading toward a property, they signal everyone else. We respond as a group, show up in numbers sufficient to discourage whatever they were planning." "That's defensive," Mary said. "What about offense?" "We're not attacking them." "Why not? They attacked us." "Because the moment we go on offense, we lose any moral high ground," Ethan explained. "Right now, we can claim self-defense. We can say we're just protecting our property. That matters, both legally and in terms of getting other people to join us. If we go after them first, we're just another gang fighting over territory." Mary didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. "What about long-term?" Clara asked. "Long-term, we make ourselves stable enough that the Rourkes can't afford to keep coming after us. We pool resources, share equipment, coordinate sales so we're getting better prices. We stop being individual weak points and become a collective strong enough to negotiate with." "Or strong enough to fight," James said quietly. Ethan met his eyes. "Or that. But fighting's the last option, not the first. The moment we commit to open war, people die. And I'm not willing to spend lives unless there's absolutely no other choice." The conversation continued into the evening, working through logistics and potential problems, how to communicate across distances, where to store shared supplies, how to divide responsibilities. It was tedious, practical work, but necessary. By the time Clara and Ethan finally rode home, darkness had fallen and both of them were exhausted. But there was also something else, a sense of momentum, of possibility that hadn't existed before. "Mary's good," Ethan said as they rode. "Tough, smart, practical. If we can get people like her on board, this might actually work." Clara wanted to share his optimism, but couldn't quite get there. "And if we can't? If people are too scared or too stubborn, then we do what we can with what we have." He looked at her in the moonlight. "But I don't think it'll come to that. Fear's powerful, but it's not the only thing that motivates people. Sometimes anger works too. Sometimes pride. Sometimes just the basic human need to feel like you're not completely helpless." They rode in silence for a while after that, both lost in their own thoughts. Clara kept replaying the conversation in her head, looking for flaws in the plan, trying to anticipate what could go wrong. There were so many variables, so many ways this could fall apart. "You ever done anything like this before?" she asked. "Organized a militia against a powerful enemy who wants us dead?" Ethan's tone was dry. "Can't say I have." "That's reassuring." Wasn't trying to be reassuring, was trying to be honest. He adjusted his reins. "But I've dealt with bullies, and the thing about bullies is they only understand force. You can't reason with them. You can't compromise with them. You can only make yourself strong enough that they decide you're not worth the trouble. And if we can't, then we find out what we're really made of." When they got home, the smell of smoke still hung in the air, acrid and unpleasant. The ruins of the barn were just dark shapes against the night sky, a reminder of what they'd lost, what they stood to lose again. They put the horses away in the corral and walked toward the house together, both too tired to do more than the minimum. But as Clara reached for the door, Ethan caught her arm. "What?" she asked. He was looking past her, face suddenly alert. "Door's open." Clara's exhaustion evaporated instantly, replaced by cold awareness. She'd locked that door herself before they left. Had checked it twice because she wasn't taking chances anymore. Ethan drew his gun, moving toward the door with careful, controlled movements. Clara followed, reaching for the knife she kept at her belt. Inadequate compared to a gun, but better than nothing. He pushed the door open slowly. Inside, darkness and silence. Then a match flared, illuminating a figure sitting in Clara's father's chair. Patrick Rourke smiled at them from the shadows. "Mr. and Mrs. Cross," he said pleasantly. "Welcome home. We need to talk." Ethan's gun stayed level, aimed directly at Patrick Rourke's chest. In the flickering matchlight, Clara could see the calculation in his eyes, measuring distance, angles, the chances of getting a clean shot before whatever backup Rourke had brought could respond. "I wouldn't," Patrick said mildly, not moving from the chair. "I came alone, which should tell you this is a conversation, not a threat. And if you shoot me now, my brothers will burn more than just your barn next time." "Get out of my house," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Patrick lit an oil lamp on the side table, taking his time. The light revealed him properly, younger than his brothers, maybe 35, with the kind of refined features that suggested education somewhere back in his history. He wore clean clothes, expensive boots, and carried himself with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to question his own authority. "Your house," he repeated thoughtfully. "See, that's the interesting part. Because according to the deed I've been reviewing, this property should have transferred to the bank 3 months ago when your father defaulted on his loan. But somehow it didn't. Somehow payments kept being made." Clara felt ice slide through her veins. She hadn't told anyone about the loan, about the money she'd scraped together selling everything that wasn't nailed down just to keep the bank from foreclosing. Hadn't told Ethan, hadn't told anyone in town. "How did you—" "I own the bank," Patrick said simply. "Well, my family does, along with most of the profitable businesses in 3 counties. So when I want to know something, I just look at the records." He leaned forward slightly. "You've been surviving on borrowed time, Clara. Living on credit you can't possibly repay. And now you've complicated everything by bringing in outside help and trying to organize resistance." "We're not organizing anything," Ethan said. His gun hadn't wavered. "Please don't insult my intelligence. You visited Mary Henderson this afternoon, spent 3 hours in her kitchen looking at maps. My brother David watched you ride in and out. Patrick's smile didn't reach his eyes. You think you're being subtle, but you're not. You think you can unite the small ranchers into some kind of defense force. It's actually rather predictable. The casual way he said it, the complete lack of concern, was more frightening than any direct threat could have been. This wasn't someone worried about their plans. This was someone who'd already figured out how to counter them. So why are you here? Clara asked. If you know everything, why bother talking to us? Because I'm offering you a choice. Patrick stood slowly, keeping his hands visible. I can be reasonable when people are reasonable with me. You sell now, at a fair price, I might add, more than this place is actually worth, and you walk away clean. No more harassment, no more fires, no more problems. You take the money, start somewhere else, and everyone moves on. And if we don't? Ethan's voice was flat. Then you continue this futile resistance until you either give up or die trying. And everyone who joins you suffers the same fate. Patrick's tone remained conversational, almost friendly. I'm not a violent man, Mr. Cross. Violence is inefficient, but my brothers are less patient than I am. And if you keep pushing, I won't be able to control them anymore. Clara felt Ethan tense beside her, saw the anger flash across his face before he controlled it. So this is a threat, Clara said. This is reality. Patrick moved toward the door, pausing when Ethan's gun tracked him. I'm giving you 1 week to decide. After that, the offer expires and things proceed the way they're going to proceed. I suggest you think very carefully about what you're willing to sacrifice for a piece of land that's slowly dying anyway. He walked past them, so close Clara could have reached out and touched him, so confident in his safety that he didn't even flinch. At the door, he paused and looked back. Your father was a stubborn man, he said to Clara. It killed him eventually. I'd hate to see the same thing happen to you. Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness like he'd never been there at all. They stood frozen for a moment after he left, listening for sounds of other riders, watching for signs of ambush. But there was nothing, just silence and the distant call of a nightbird. He was alone, Ethan said finally, lowering his gun. Actually alone. That's worse. Clara moved to the window, watching the empty yard. If he's confident enough to come here by himself, into our house, knowing we're armed, that means he doesn't see us as a threat at all. Or he wanted to deliver that message personally, make sure we understood he's not like his brothers. Ethan checked the door, examining the lock. He picked this clean, professional work. This isn't some ranch thug, he's had training. Clara felt exhaustion crash over her again, heavier than before. She sank into the chair Patrick had been sitting in, then immediately stood back up, repulsed by the idea of occupying the same space. We can't sell, she said. I know. Even if we wanted to, even if that was an option, giving in now just proves that violence works. Every other rancher in the territory would be next. I know, Ethan repeated. He holstered his gun and moved to the kitchen, pouring water from the basin. But he's right about one thing. We're running on borrowed time. Between the loan and the land conditions and the Rourkes actively working against us, the odds aren't good. So what do? What we planned. Talk to the other ranchers. Build our alliance. Make ourselves strong enough that attacking us costs more than it's worth. He drank, then refilled the cup for her. But we also need to be realistic. Patrick just told us we have 1 week before things escalate. That's not enough time to organize everyone, get them trained, coordinate defenses. Clara took the water, her hands still shaking slightly from adrenaline. Then we prioritize. Focus on the people most likely to join, most able to help. Forget the ones who will slow us down arguing. That's cold. That's practical. She met his eyes. You said it yourself. We don't have time for perfect. We need functional. Over the next 2 days, they rode hard, visiting every rancher Mary had identified as a potential ally. The reception varied wildly. Peter Jacobson listened to their pitch with arms crossed and jaw set, then threw them off his property with language that would have made a sailor blush. Sarah Jacobson ran after them as they were leaving, pressed a note into Clara's hand that said simply, "Give us time. He'll come around." The Reeves family was more receptive. Anna Reeves, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 20s, listened to everything they had to say while her father snored drunk in the corner. "How many people you got so far?" she asked when they finished. "Including us? 5, Ethan said. "Henderson family's 3, us 2. That's not much of an army." "It's a start."
And it'll grow once people see we're serious. Anna looked skeptical but not dismissive. My father won't be any use, but I've got 2 brothers who can shoot straight and follow orders. And we've got high ground on our property, good sight lines. Could work as a lookout point if you need one. We need one, Clara said immediately. Then we're in. But I want something clear up front. My family gets protected same as yours. If the Rourkes come after us because we joined your little rebellion, you better be there. We will be, Ethan promised. They shook on it, and Anna's grip was as strong as any man's Clara had encountered. The Brennan brothers, twins who ran cattle on their father's old land, signed up after 10 minutes of conversation. Been waiting for someone to organize this, the older one, Marcus, said. About damn time. But for every success, there were 2 failures. The Olsons said no, too scared of retribution. The Winchesters said they were considering the Rourke's offer to buy them out. The Harpers had already sold, were packing to leave the territory entirely. By the 3rd day, they had 12 people committed, not including children or those too old or infirm to fight. 12 against the Rourke's 20 plus. It's not enough, Clara said as they rode home that evening. Even if we're better positioned, better organized, the numbers are too uneven. Numbers aren't everything, Ethan countered. We've got motivation, they don't. We're fighting for survival. They're just following orders. Motivation doesn't stop bullets. No. But it affects how you use them, how you plan, how far you're willing to go. He adjusted his hat against the setting sun. We need to meet. Everyone together, go over the plan, assign positions, make sure everyone knows what they're doing. Where? Neutral ground, somewhere the Rourkes aren't watching. Ethan thought for a moment. There's that old line shack about halfway between your property and the Hendersons, the one that's been abandoned since the territory split. Clara knew the place, a small, rundown cabin that had once served as a boundary marker between different grazing areas. It was isolated, defensible, and far enough from major properties that they could gather without being easily observed. Tomorrow night, she said, get everyone there after dark. They spent the rest of the ride in silence, both acutely aware that they were approaching a point of no return. Once everyone gathered, once plans were made and commitments solidified, backing out would become exponentially harder. They'd be locked into this course of action, for better or worse. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the house settle, to Ethan moving around upstairs, to all the small sounds that had become familiar over the past month. 1 month. That's all it had been since he'd arrived. 1 month since she'd married a stranger, out of desperation. It felt like years. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to Ethan shaking her shoulder, his face grim in the pre-dawn light. What? She mumbled, still half asleep. The Reeves place. Someone set fire to their wool stores. Anna's asking for help. Clara was up and moving before fully processing the words. They rode hard through the gray morning, arriving to find the Reeves property in chaos. The fire was out, barely, but the damage was extensive. Months' worth of wool, ready to be sold, reduced to smoking char. Anna stood in the middle of it, soot-streaked and furious. They came just before dawn, 3 riders, torched the storage barn, and were gone before we could get organized. Anyone hurt? Ethan asked. My youngest brother took a bullet in the shoulder. Clean through, he'll live. But they weren't trying to miss by much. Her jaw was tight. This is because we joined you, because we said we'd fight back. Clara felt the weight of that responsibility settle on her shoulders. This woman had trusted them, had believed their promises of mutual protection, and now she was paying the price. I'm sorry, Clara said. Sorry doesn't rebuild my barn or replace my wool. Anna's voice was harsh. But neither does quitting. So what's the plan? When do we hit back? We don't, Ethan said firmly. Not like that. The moment we retaliate with violence, we're just escalating. They already escalated. Anna gestured at the ruins. What do you call this? A test. They're seeing if we break, seeing if hitting one of us makes the rest scatter. Ethan's voice was calm but intense. And if we do what they expect, if we strike back rashly, we prove them right. We prove we're just a bunch of angry ranchers with no discipline or coordination. So we just take it. Anna looked incredulous. No. We show them that attacking one of us brings everyone down on them. We double the watch on your property. We make sure someone's always here. We demonstrate that you're not alone, that hurting you costs them more than it's worth. Anna studied him, anger warring with reason.
Finally, she nodded. Fine. But if they come back, if they try this again, I'm shooting first and organizing later. Fair enough, Ethan agreed. They spent the day helping the Reeves family clean up and fortify. Marcus and his brother showed up mid-morning, having heard about the attack through whatever grapevine connected the scattered ranchers. Mary Henderson arrived in the afternoon with her sons, bringing supplies and food. Seeing them all together, working, coordinating, supporting each other, Clara felt something shift. This wasn't just an alliance on paper anymore. It was becoming real. That night, they gathered at the line shack as planned. 13 people crammed into a space meant for maybe 4, the air close and warm with body heat. Clara looked around at the assembled faces, weathered, tired, but determined. Ethan spread the map across a makeshift table. We all know why we're here. The Rourkes are trying to force us out through intimidation and violence. Individually, we can't stand against them. Together, we might have a chance. But that only works if we're organized, disciplined, and committed to protecting each other. How's it work? Peter Jacobson asked. He'd shown up despite his earlier hostility, looking uncomfortable but present. Specifically, warning system first, Ethan said, marking positions on the map. We establish observation posts at high points throughout the territory. Someone's always watching, always ready to signal if they see Rourke men moving. Anna's property here, he pointed, gives us a clear view northeast. The Henderson place covers south. Clara's land watches west. And if we spot trouble? James Henderson asked. James Henderson. You signal. We've got a system. Mirrors during the day, fire at night. Everyone who sees the signal responds. Drop what you're doing and ride to whoever needs help. The idea is that the Rourkes can't move against any single target without the rest of us showing up. What about our own properties while we're gone? Someone asked. That's the risk, Ethan admitted. But it's a calculated one. The Rourkes operate on fear and isolation. If we prove we're not isolated anymore, that changes their calculus. They have to consider whether attacking one person is worth facing 12. Mary leaned forward. And if they decide it is worth it? If they come at us with everything they've got? The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone knew this was the real question, the one that mattered most. Then we fight, Ethan said simply. Not because we want to, not because it's our first choice, but because some things are worth fighting for, and our homes are one of them. Easy to say, Peter muttered. Harder to do when you're staring down the barrel of a gun. True, Ethan agreed, which is why we need to be smart about this. We're not gunslingers. We're ranchers who happen to be armed. Our advantage isn't in shooting. It's in knowing our land, knowing each other, and being willing to work as a unit instead of individuals. They spent the next 2 hours working through details. Who would take which watch shifts? Where supplies would be stored? How to communicate beyond the signal system? What to do if someone was injured? What to do if someone was killed? That last part hit hard. Clara watched faces around the room as they discussed contingencies for death, saw the reality of what they were committing to sink in. This wasn't abstract anymore. This was planning for the real possibility that some of them wouldn't survive. I want to be clear about something, Clara said when the planning wound down. No one has to do this. If you want to back out now, there's no judgment. This is going to be dangerous, possibly deadly, and I won't think less of anyone who decides their family's safety is more important than this fight. No one moved. No one spoke up. Finally, Anna broke the silence. We're all here for the same reason. Because we don't have anywhere else to go. Because the Rourkes have made it clear that there's no safe option anymore. Just different ways of losing. At least this way, we go down on our feet. Or we don't go down at all, Marcus added. I'm betting on that. Nervous laughter rippled through the group, breaking some of the tension. As they filed out into the night, heading back to their respective properties, Ethan pulled Clara aside. That went better than I expected, he said quietly. Did it? Everyone looked terrified. Being terrified and doing it anyway, that's called courage. He looked out at the departing riders. They showed up. That's what matters. Clara wanted to believe him, but couldn't shake the feeling that they were all marching toward something terrible, something that couldn't be undone or taken back. The next morning, they implemented the watch system. Clara took first shift on her property's high point, a rocky outcrop that gave her a clear view west toward Rourke land. It was tedious work, just sitting and watching, but necessary. Around noon, she saw movement, 3 riders coming fast across Rourke property toward the boundary line. She grabbed the mirror and flashed the signal. then mounted up and rode hard for the house. Ethan was already moving when she arrived, grabbing weapons and supplies. How many? 3. Could be scouts. Could be another attack. Where are they headed? Can't tell yet, but they're moving with purpose. Within 20 minutes, their entire group had converged, not at any specific property, but at a central meeting point they'd designated. 13 people, all armed, all watching the horizon for signs of the approaching riders. The Rourke men came into view and stopped dead when they saw the assembled force. Even from a distance, Clara could see the moment they realized they were outnumbered and outpositioned. They turned and rode back the way they'd come. It worked, Mary breathed. They actually backed off. This time, Ethan cautioned, next time they'll bring more people. Or they'll try a different approach. But Clara could see the effect it had on the group. They'd stood together, presented a unified front, and the Rourkes had retreated. It was a small victory, but a real one. Over the next 4 days, the pattern repeated. Rourke men would approach, the watch would signal, the group would assemble, the Rourke men would withdraw. Each time, confidence grew. Each time, the coordination improved. But Clara knew it couldn't last. The Rourkes weren't stupid. They were testing defenses, learning patterns, figuring out how to counter the new strategy, and eventually they'd find a weakness to exploit. The weakness came on the 6th day. Clara was at the Henderson place helping Mary repair fence when they saw smoke rising from the south. Too much smoke. Too concentrated. That's the Brennan property, Mary said, already moving toward her horse. They rode hard, gathering others as they went. By the time they arrived, the Brennan farmhouse was fully engulfed, flames shooting through the roof. Marcus and his brother were in the yard, both bloodied, both still armed. Where are they? Ethan demanded. Gone. Hit us while everyone else was spread out. 8 men, maybe 10. We got a few shots off, but they had numbers. Marcus spat blood. They were laughing. Said this is what happens when you forget your place. The house collapsed in on itself as they watched, sending sparks spiraling into the afternoon sky. Everything the Brennan brothers owned, everything they'd built, gone in under an hour. We can rebuild, Clara said, though she knew how hollow it sounded. With what? Marcus's laugh was bitter. We spent everything we had fortifying the property. There's nothing left. The defeat in his voice was crushing. This was what the Rourkes wanted, to break them psychologically as much as physically. To prove that resistance was futile, that all their planning and coordination meant nothing in the face of overwhelming force. But then Anna spoke up. You'll stay at my place. We've got room, and we'll all contribute materials to rebuild. It'll take time, but we'll do it. I can spare lumber, Peter said. Not much, but some. We've got tools, James added. One by one, the others chimed in, offering what they could, which wasn't much, but collectively might be enough. Clara watched the Brennan brothers process this, watched them realize that losing their house didn't mean they'd lost everything. This is what they don't understand, Ethan said quietly. They think burning buildings breaks people, but all it does is make us more committed to not letting them win. They salvaged what they could from the wreckage. Tools, personal items, anything that had survived. Then they helped the Brennan brothers move their few remaining possessions to the Reeves place, where they'd stay until something more permanent could be arranged. As night fell and people dispersed, Clara found herself alone with Ethan near the smoking ruins. We're losing, she said. Slowly, but we're losing. Maybe. He didn't try to contradict her. But we're also learning, getting stronger, making them work harder for every victory. Is that enough? It has to be, because the alternative is giving up, and we're past that point now. He looked at her in the fading light. You know that, right? There's no backing out anymore. Not after everything that's happened. We finished this one way or another, Clara nodded, feeling the weight of that truth. They'd crossed a line somewhere in the past week, moved from defensive posturing into actual conflict, and now the only way out was through, whatever that meant. That night, she barely slept again. Every sound jerked her awake. Every creak of the house had her reaching for the rifle she now kept beside the bed. Ethan was the same. She could hear him moving around upstairs, restless and alert. Around 3 a.m, she gave up pretending and went outside. Found Ethan already on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. Can't sleep either? She asked.
Keep thinking about what's coming, what we've set in motion. He didn't look at her, kept his eyes on the horizon. People are going to die because of choices we made. People were dying anyway, just slower. That's true. Doesn't make it easier. Clara sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You regret this? Any of it? He was quiet for a long time. I regret that it's necessary, but no. I don't regret fighting back. And I don't regret meeting you. The last part caught her off guard. In all the chaos and planning and fear, they'd barely had time to think about what they were to each other beyond tactical partners. But sitting there in the pre-dawn darkness, Clara realized something had shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained had eroded, worn down by shared danger and mutual dependence. I don't regret it either, she said quietly. They sat there together until the sun started to rise, not talking, just existing in the same space, finding comfort in not being alone. The attack came 2 days later. The signal came just after midnight, fire on the horizon, burning in the pattern they'd agreed on. 3 short blazes, pause. 3 more. The universal call that meant everyone converge, bring weapons, come now. Clara was already awake when she saw it, had been sitting by the window unable to shake the feeling that something was coming. She grabbed her rifle and was shouting for Ethan before the 3rd signal even lit. I see it, he called down, already moving. That's coming from the Henderson place. They were mounted and riding within minutes, pushing the horses hard through the darkness. As they got closer, Clara could see more than just signal fires. There was real flame, structure burning, and the distinct crack of gunfire cutting through the night air. They're not running, Ethan said, tension sharp in his voice. They're fighting. Other riders converged from different directions, all heading toward the same point. Clara counted shapes in the darkness. 6, 7, maybe 8 of their people responding. Not everyone. Not enough. The Henderson property came into view and Clara's stomach dropped. The main house was intact, but the barn was burning. Not the careful, controlled destruction of a warning fire, but a full assault meant to consume everything. And surrounding the house, lit by the flames, she could see riders. More than a dozen of them, all armed, all firing at the house where the Hendersons had barricaded themselves. They're trying to burn them out, she breathed. Ethan was already assessing angles, calculating odds. We hit them from behind, fast and hard, break their formation before they realize we're here. We're outnumbered. We're unexpected. That counts for more. He looked at the assembled riders, Peter Jacobson, both Brennan brothers, Anna and one of her brothers. 2 others Clara didn't immediately recognize in the darkness. 9 total, against at least 15. Bad odds by any measure. But they didn't have a choice. Ethan gave quick orders in a harsh whisper. Spread out. Come at them from 3 sides. Don't try to be heroes. Shoot to scatter them, not to kill. We want them running, not fighting to the death. And if they don't run? Marcus asked. Then we adjust. Ethan checked his rifle. But they're expecting trapped prey, not a pack with teeth. Let's give them something to think about. They split into groups, circling around to approach from different angles. Clara found herself paired with Anna, both of them working their way through the scrub brush to get a clear shot at the rider's flank. You ever shoot at a person before? Anna whispered. No. Me neither. Anna's voice was tight. Guess we're learning together. They got into position just as Ethan's group opened fire. The effect was immediate and chaotic. Riders who'd been casually shooting at the house suddenly found themselves taking fire from behind, horses rearing and screaming, men shouting contradictory orders. Clara sighted on a rider who was trying to organize a response and squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder and her shot went wide, kicking up dirt 5 feet from her target. But it didn't matter. The man dove for cover anyway, more concerned with not getting hit than with where the shot came from. Beside her, Anna was firing methodically, working the bolt action on her rifle like she'd been doing it her whole life. Clara didn't know if she was hitting anything, but the volume of fire was enough to add to the confusion. The Rourke men were trying to regroup, trying to figure out how many attackers they were facing and from which directions. In the chaos and darkness, Clara hoped it seemed like more than it was. Then she saw Patrick Rourke himself, still mounted, trying to rally his men. He was shouting something she couldn't make out over the gunfire, gesturing toward the house. Some of his men started to respond, started to reform their lines.
If they got organized, Clara's group was finished. They'd lose the advantage of surprise and find themselves in a straight fight they couldn't win. She saw Ethan see the same thing, saw him make a decision she knew was dangerous even as he made it. He broke from cover, riding hard directly at the Rourke formation, firing as he went. "What is he doing?" Anna hissed, drawing their attention, making himself the target, giving everyone else a chance to either advance or retreat while the enemy focused on the single rider charging their position. It was brave and stupid and exactly the kind of thing that got people killed. Clara was moving before she consciously decided to, breaking from her position and angling toward where Ethan was riding. If he was going to do something suicidal, she wasn't letting him do it alone. The next few minutes were pure chaos. Later, Clara would have trouble remembering the sequence of events, would only recall fragments. The sound of bullets hitting dirt near her horse's hooves, the smell of gunpowder and smoke, someone screaming, Anna firing from somewhere behind her, the Henderson house door opening, and Mary and her sons adding their fire to the mix. She saw Ethan's horse go down, saw him roll clear and come up shooting from one knee. Saw Patrick Rourke wheel toward him, gun raised. Clara didn't think, just acted. She fired at Patrick, the shot going wild but close enough to make him flinch and turn. Their eyes met across the burning darkness, and she saw recognition flash across his face. Then calculation. He shouted something to his men and they started to pull back, not running exactly, but withdrawing in something resembling order. The attack was breaking apart, losing cohesion. "Let them go," Ethan shouted. "Don't pursue." It went against every instinct, watching the men who just tried to kill them ride away into the darkness. But Ethan was right. Pursuing would mean spreading out, losing their own cohesion, possibly riding into an ambush. As the last of the Rourke men disappeared, silence crashed down like a physical weight. The only sound was the crackling of the burning barn and the heavy breathing of exhausted fighters. Clara slid off her horse, legs shaking so badly she almost fell. Ethan was limping toward her, blood on his face from where he'd hit the ground, his horse standing behind him with a gash across its shoulder, but apparently not critically injured. "You all right?" he asked. "I should be asking you that. You're bleeding." "It's nothing." He wiped at his face, smearing the blood. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "I didn't hit anything. You hit close enough to matter. That's the same thing in the dark." He looked past her toward the Henderson house. "We need to check on Mary and her boys." The Hendersons emerged slowly, weapons still ready, clearly unsure if the fight was actually over. Mary's face was streaked with soot, and her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "You came." "Of course we came," Clara said. "That was the deal." "I know, but knowing and seeing are different things." Mary looked at the assembled defenders, at the people who'd risked their lives to respond to her signal. "Thank you." "Don't thank us yet," Ethan said. "They'll be back. This was just the first real push. They wanted to see if we'd actually fight, actually coordinate. Now they know." "Did we hurt any of them?" James Henderson asked. "Don't know. Saw a few go down but couldn't tell if they were hit or just taking cover." Ethan was already moving, checking on the other defenders. "Anyone on our side injured?" Peter Jacobson had a bullet graze across his arm, already bleeding through a makeshift bandage. One of Anna's brothers had been thrown from his horse and was favoring his left leg, but miraculously, no one was seriously hurt. "We got lucky," Marcus said, voicing what they were all thinking. "Next time we might not." "Then we make sure there's not a next time," Anna countered. "We hit them back, hard enough that they think twice." "With what?" Peter demanded. "We barely survived this. You want to attack their property? We wouldn't make it halfway there." "So what's your solution? Wait here until they come back with more men and better planning?" The argument started to escalate, voices rising, exhaustion and fear turning into anger that needed somewhere to go. Clara saw Ethan about to intervene and held up a hand. Let them get it out. Let them process what just happened. Finally, Mary cut through the noise. "Enough! We're all tired and scared and looking for someone to blame. But that someone isn't each other. We did what we said we'd do. We showed up, we fought together, and we drove them off. That matters." "For how long?" Peter's voice was heavy. "A day? A week? They're not going to stop. They're just going to keep coming until we're all dead or gone." "Maybe," Mary agreed, "but I'd rather die fighting than die running. And if you feel differently, no one's stopping you from leaving." Peter glared at her, then at the assembled group, then finally shook his head. I'm not leaving. I'm just saying we need a better plan than waiting to see what happens. He's right, Ethan said. Tonight proved we can respond to direct attacks, but we can't just play defense forever. We need to change the situation somehow, make it not worth their while to keep coming after us. How? Clara asked. We've already tried showing strength, tried proving we're organized. What else is there? We make them the ones who are vulnerable, Anna said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. They operate on fear and intimidation, so we make them afraid, make them worry about their own properties, their own operations, force them to defend instead of attack. That's what I was saying, Peter protested. No, you were talking about a frontal assault on their ranch. I'm talking about making them uncertain, nervous. The same thing they've been doing to us. Anna's eyes were hard in the firelight. Cut their fences, spook their cattle, make them spread their men thin, trying to protect everything at once instead of concentrating on attacking us. Clara saw Ethan processing this, saw him recognize both the strategic value and the moral complexity. They'd been fighting a defensive war because it let them claim the moral high ground. But defensive wars were exhausting, required constant vigilance, and ultimately favored whoever could sustain losses longer. It's escalation, Ethan said slowly. Once we start hitting their operations, there's no pretending this is just about self-defense anymore. We're past pretending, Marcus said. They burned my house down. They just tried to burn Mary out with her sons inside. What more escalation is there? Killing, Ethan said bluntly. Right now, both sides are mostly just trying to scare the other. Once people start dying, really dying, not just getting grazed, it becomes something else entirely, something that doesn't end until one side is completely destroyed. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. They were standing at another threshold, another point where they could still theoretically turn back. But like all the previous thresholds, the path behind them had already collapsed. There was only forward, whatever that meant. I'm not saying we target people, Anna clarified. I'm saying we target property, infrastructure, make them spend time and resources on defense, give them a reason to negotiate instead of just assuming they'll eventually break us. And if they don't negotiate, Mary asked, if they just hit us harder in response? Then we already know what we're dealing with, Anna said, and we respond accordingly. They talked through the night, too wired to sleep, planning and arguing and gradually building something that resembled a strategy. Not a good strategy. They didn't have the resources or numbers for that, but a functional one, built on the understanding that survival sometimes required becoming the thing you'd been trying to avoid. As dawn broke, Clara found herself standing apart from the group, watching the sun rise over land that looked deceptively peaceful in the early light. Ethan joined her after a few minutes, both of them too tired to do more than stand there. This isn't what I thought we'd become, Clara said quietly. What did you think? I don't know. Survivors, maybe. People who just held on until things got better. She gestured at the burned barn, at the evidence of violence scattered across the property. Not this. Sometimes surviving means fighting. There's no clean line between them. Ethan's voice was rough with exhaustion. But for what it's worth, I think your father would be proud. You haven't just held on, you've built something. These people trust you, follow you. That's not nothing. It'll be something if they get killed following me. That's the weight you carry, the weight anyone carries who tries to lead. He looked at her directly. But you don't carry it alone. That's what tonight proved. We're in this together, all of us. The burden gets shared. Clara wanted to believe that, wanted to take comfort in it, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were sliding towards something catastrophic, something that would break them all in ways they couldn't anticipate. Over the next week, they implemented Anna's strategy. Small, careful strikes against Rourke operations, cut fences here, spooked cattle there, damaged irrigation equipment in a way that looked like it could be accidental. Nothing dramatic enough to provoke immediate retaliation, but enough to require the Rourkes to spread their resources thin. The effect was subtle but present. Clara started hearing through the town grapevine that the Rourkes were pulling men back from offensive operations to guard their own properties, that Patrick had been seen arguing with his brothers about strategy, that there was frustration and confusion among their ranks about who was hitting them and how. It's working, Marcus reported after a supply run to town. They're off balance. Don't know if they're dealing with us or with someone else taking advantage of the situation. How long before they figure it out? Mary asked. Not long, Ethan said. We need to be ready for when they do. The response came faster than expected. 3 days after Marcus's report, riders appeared on the ridge overlooking Clara's property. Not attacking, not even approaching, just watching. A reminder that they were still there, still capable of striking whenever they chose. Clara watched them from the porch, rifle in hand, until they finally turned and left. But the message was clear. This wasn't over. It was just pausing. That night, as she and Ethan sat reviewing watch schedules and supply inventories, someone knocked on the door. They both tensed, hands moving to weapons, until a familiar voice called out, "It's Thomas Garrett. I need to talk to you." Clara opened the door cautiously. Garrett looked haggard, older than he had just weeks ago, with worry lines deep around his eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Everything." He came inside without being invited, too agitated to observe niceties. "The Rourkes are planning something big. I don't know what exactly, but Patrick's been buying supplies in town, rope, kerosene, ammunition, more than makes sense for regular operations." "When?" Ethan asked sharply. "Soon. Maybe a few days, maybe less." Garrett looked between them. "And there's something else. Sheriff Dalton's been deputizing men. Says he's concerned about lawlessness in the territory, needs extra help maintaining order." Clara felt cold understanding settle in her stomach. "He's giving them legal cover." "Exactly. Whatever they're planning, they'll be able to claim they were acting as law enforcement. Makes it harder for anyone to argue they were in the wrong." "How many deputies?" Ethan's voice was tight. "At least 10, maybe more." Garrett pulled out a piece of paper, hands shaking slightly. "I wrote down names of everyone I saw getting sworn in. Some are regular Rourke men, but some are just opportunists looking for an excuse to be violent." Ethan took the list, scanning it quickly. His expression went dark. "I know 3 of these men. They're not just hired guns, they're killers, the kind who enjoy it." "Then we need to run," Clara said. "Get everyone out before whatever's coming happens." "Run where?" Garrett asked. "The Rourkes control most of the territory. And even if you could get away, they'd just track you down eventually. Or they'd take your land anyway, and you'd have nothing to come back to." "So we fight," Anna's voice came from the doorway. She'd arrived with her brothers while they were talking, had heard enough to understand the situation. "We make our stand now all together before they can pick us off individually." "Against deputized lawmen?" Peter appeared behind her, looking sick. "That's not self-defense anymore. That's open rebellion." "It's self-defense if they're corrupt deputies acting outside the law," Ethan countered. "But yes, it's a thin line, and once we cross it, there's no going back." More people arrived as the night wore on. Mary and her sons, the Brennan brothers, others who'd gotten word that something was happening. They crammed into Clara's small house, filling it with nervous energy and desperate planning. "We can't win a straight fight," Marcus said, voicing what everyone knew. "Even if we're defending, even if we're organized, they have numbers, training, and the law on their side." "Then we don't fight straight," Anna said. "We do what we've been doing. We be unpredictable. Hit and run. Make them chase us over ground we know better. Divide their forces." "That only works if we have somewhere to lead them," Ethan said. "Somewhere we can control the engagement, turn their numbers into a liability instead of an advantage." Clara looked at the map on her wall, at the territory she'd lived in her whole life, and slowly an idea formed. Desperate and dangerous, but maybe possible. "The canyon," she said. Everyone stopped talking and looked at her. "The one on the eastern edge of my property. It's narrow, with high walls, easy to defend, impossible to surround." "It's also a trap," Mary pointed out. "If they get people above you on those walls, you're sitting ducks." "Only if they know we're there before we're set up," Clara said, working through it. "But if we're already in position when they arrive, if we control the high ground, it becomes their trap, not ours." Ethan was studying the map, calculating angles and sight lines. "It could work, but it requires perfect timing. We'd need to draw them in deliberately, make them think they're chasing scattered defenders, then funnel them into the canyon without them realizing it's intentional." "How do we do that?" someone asked. "We give them what they want," Clara said, the plan crystallizing as she spoke. "We make it look like we're panicking, splitting up, running. They'll chase because that's what they've been waiting for, confirmation that we're breaking." "And then?" Peter's voice was skeptical.
And then we show them what happens when they underestimate us. Clara looked around at the assembled faces, tired, scared, but still present, still committed. This is our land. We know every rock, every draw, every path. We use that. Make the territory itself our weapon. The planning took most of the night. They needed to coordinate timing perfectly, needed everyone to know their role exactly. There was no room for confusion or hesitation. Either this worked cleanly or it failed catastrophically. As people finally started to leave in the pre-dawn hours, heading back to their properties to prepare, Ethan pulled Clara aside. "You know this is a huge gamble," he said quietly. "I know. If it goes wrong, if the timing's off or they figure out what we're doing, people will die. Probably a lot of people." "I know that too." Clara met his eyes. "But if we do nothing, we die anyway. At least this way, we're choosing how it happens." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, then we commit fully. No half measures." "No half measures," Clara agreed. They spent the next 2 days preparing, moving supplies to the canyon in small loads that wouldn't attract attention, scouting positions, making sure everyone knew the signal that would trigger the plan. The waiting was excruciating, knowing an attack was coming, but not knowing when, existing in a state of constant alertness that wore on everyone's nerves. The break came on the third morning. Clara was on watch when she saw them, a large group of riders, at least 20, moving with the kind of organized purpose that suggested official business rather than a raid. Leading them was Sheriff Dalton himself, with Patrick Rourke riding beside him. Clara signaled immediately, then mounted up and rode hard for the rally point. The plan was in motion now, no stopping it. Within an hour, their entire group had assembled, 13 fighters, all armed, all aware that this was likely the decisive moment. Either they broke the Rourkes here, or they lost everything. "They're coming from the west," Clara reported. 20 riders moving slow, they're not trying to hide. "Because they think they've already won," Anna said. "Think we'll just surrender to the sheriff." "Then let's prove them wrong," Ethan said. He looked at the assembled group. "Everyone remember their positions, their timing." Nods all around, though Clara could see fear in every face. They were ranchers and farmers, not soldiers. What they were about to attempt should have been impossible, but impossible was all they had left. "Split into groups," Ethan ordered. "Make it look disorganized, like we're panicking and scattering. Lead them east, toward the canyon, but don't make it obvious. Take different routes. Make them think they're pursuing easy targets." The group split apart, heading in different directions. Clara found herself paired with Mary Henderson, both of them riding hard toward the eastern boundary. Behind them, she could hear shouts. The pursuing riders had spotted them, were giving chase. "They're taking the bait," Mary gasped as they rode. "Let's hope the rest does too," Clara said. They led their pursuers on a winding chase, always staying just far enough ahead to keep them engaged, but not so far they'd lose interest. Clara could hear more gunfire from other directions, the other groups doing the same thing, drawing different portions of the attacking force into the trap. The canyon mouth appeared ahead, narrow and unremarkable. Clara and Mary plunged through it without slowing, riding hard into the narrow space. Behind them, their pursuers followed, too focused on the chase to realize they were being funneled into a killing zone. As Clara reached the far end of the canyon, she looked up and saw familiar faces on the rock walls above, the half of their group that had moved into position during the night, hidden and waiting. The trap was set. Now they just had to spring it. The Rourke riders poured into the canyon like water into a funnel, their horses kicking up dust that hung in the narrow space. Clara counted them as they entered. 12 men in the first wave, including Sheriff Dalton and Patrick Rourke himself. The rest would be coming from other directions, chasing the other groups, all converging on the same point without realizing it. She and Mary had dismounted at the far end, taking cover behind a rock formation that gave them clear sight lines back down the canyon. Above them, hidden among the rocks and scrub, the other half of their group waited in position. "Not yet," Clara whispered, though no one could hear her. "Let them get deeper." The riders slowed as they entered the narrow passage, some survival instinct making them cautious even as their confidence kept them moving forward. Patrick was scanning the walls, clearly sensing something wrong but not yet able to identify what. Then Ethan's voice rang out from above, amplified by the canyon walls. "That's far enough." Every rider jerked to a halt, guns coming up,
horses sidling nervously. They looked up and saw what Clara had seen, armed figures on both sides of the canyon, positioned to create a crossfire that would be impossible to escape. "You're surrounded," Ethan called down. "Drop your weapons and we can all walk away from this." Sheriff Dalton's face flushed red. "You're threatening law enforcement? That's a hanging offense." "You're not law enforcement," Clara shouted back, stepping out from cover. "You're hired thugs wearing badges. There's a difference." "The badge is what matters," Patrick said, his voice carrying that same casual confidence he'd had in her house. "Whether you believe in it or not, it makes this legal. You're the ones breaking the law." "By defending our property?" Mary called out. "By refusing to be burned out of our homes?" "By organizing an armed insurrection against legitimate authority," Patrick corrected. "That's how this will be written up, how it'll be remembered. You'll be outlaws, and we'll be the ones who stopped you." Clara felt the truth of that like a knife between her ribs. He was right about the narrative, about how this would be recorded if they lost. History was written by winners, and the Rourkes had been winning for years. But history hadn't met the people standing on these canyon walls yet. "Maybe," Clara said, "or maybe you're the ones who'll be remembered as the bullies who pushed too hard and finally met people who pushed back." More riders were entering the canyon now from the opposite end. The groups that had been chasing other defenders, realizing too late that they were being funneled into the same trap. The Rourke force was now split, caught between Clara's position at one end and the new arrivals at the other, with armed defenders above. The numerical advantage they'd counted on had evaporated. Now they were the ones trapped. Patrick saw it too. She watched the calculation happen on his face, the recognition that this wasn't going the way he'd planned, that his prey had somehow become predators. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw uncertainty flicker across his features. "You can't win this," he said, but there was less conviction in his voice. "Even if you drive us off today, we'll come back. With more men, better planning, you can't sustain this forever." "Neither can you," Ethan said. "That's what you don't understand. We're not trying to defeat you permanently. We're just making it too expensive to keep coming after us. And every time you try and fail, that cost goes up." "We're not the ones who'll pay it," Sheriff Dalton blustered. "You're in violation of—" "Save it!" Anna cut him off from her position on the wall. "We all know you're a coward wearing a badge. The question is whether you're willing to die for the Rourke's money, or if you'd rather ride away and pretend this never happened." The silence that followed was tense and electric. Clara could see the Rourke men looking at each other, weighing odds, considering whether loyalty was worth bleeding for. Some of them were true believers, committed to the cause or to Patrick's leadership, but others were just hired hands, men who'd signed on for easy money and intimidation work, not for actual combat. One of them, a younger man near the back, slowly lowered his rifle. Then another. Then a third. "Anyone who wants to leave can go," Ethan called out. "Right now. No one will stop you. This fight's between us and the people who've been terrorizing this territory. If you're not one of them, you can ride out." It was a calculated risk, letting potential enemies go, trusting they'd actually leave instead of regrouping and attacking from a different angle. But Clara saw the strategy behind it. Every man who left was one less they'd have to fight, and more importantly, it would demoralize those who stayed. The younger man who'd lowered his rifle turned his horse and started riding back the way he'd come. 2 others followed, then 3 more. Within minutes, nearly half the Rourke force had peeled away, leaving only the true loyalists and those too proud or too committed to back down. Patrick's face had gone white with fury. "You come back here! I'm giving you a direct—" "You're not giving orders anymore," Marcus Brennan called down from above. "Look around. You're outnumbered now, outpositioned. And your men are abandoning you because they finally figured out what we've known all along. You're not worth dying for." Sheriff Dalton was looking increasingly panicked, clearly realizing that his badge wasn't the protection he'd thought it would be. "This is still a legal matter," he tried again, voice shaking. "You're interfering with—" "We're defending ourselves," Clara interrupted, "against corrupt law enforcement working for people who've been destroying our lives. When this gets reviewed, and it will get reviewed, that's what the investigation will show. Fires, poisoned cattle, destroyed property, all tied back to the Rourkes. You think your badge will protect you when that comes out?" She was bluffing partly. There was no guarantee any investigation would actually happen or uncover the truth. But the seed of doubt was planted. She could see Dalton processing it, wondering if he'd miscalculated. "Last chance," Ethan said. "Drop weapons and ride out. or stay and see how this ends. Your choice. Patrick remained mounted, back rigid, clearly unwilling to show weakness, even as his position collapsed around him. But the men still with him were wavering, looking to each other for guidance that wasn't coming. Then gunfire cracked out from the canyon wall, not from their people, but from one of the remaining Rourke men, aiming at Ethan's position. The bullet struck rock inches from where he stood, sending up a spray of stone fragments. Everything went to hell immediately. The defenders opened fire, not in a coordinated volley, but in a ragged, panicked response to seeing one of their own nearly killed. The Rourke men returned fire, some aiming at the walls, others trying to charge toward Clara's position at the far end. Clara was shooting before she consciously decided to, working the rifle bolt mechanically, not aiming at people so much as at spaces where people were. She saw a horse go down, saw a man dive behind rocks, saw Sheriff Dalton wheeling his mount in circles, trying to decide which direction meant safety. Beside her, Mary was firing with grim determination, each shot careful and deliberate. "We tried to avoid this," she said, more to herself than to Clara. "I know. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted maybe 5 minutes. But in that compressed time, Clara experienced something she'd never felt before. The strange clarity that came from acting purely on instinct, where thinking happened too fast to question. She reloaded without looking at her hands, sighted targets without conscious calculation, moved between cover positions based on some animal understanding of angles and exposure. When it ended, the silence felt unnatural. The Rourke force had broken completely. Some had fled back down the canyon the way they'd come. Others had surrendered, hands raised, weapons thrown down. A few lay wounded, being tended by their own people, or in some cases by the defenders they'd just been trying to kill. Patrick Rourke was one of the wounded. He sat propped against a rock, clutching his shoulder where blood seeped through his fingers, his face gray with shock and pain. The careful confidence he'd always carried was completely gone, replaced by the stunned disbelief of someone whose worldview had just shattered. Sheriff Dalton had fled. Clara had seen him ride out early in the fighting, abandoning the men he was supposedly leading. Ethan climbed down from his position, moving among the defenders to check for injuries. Peter Jacobson had taken a bullet through his leg, painful but not life-threatening if they could get him to a doctor. One of Anna's brothers had been grazed across the ribs. James Henderson had broken his wrist falling behind cover, but miraculously, impossibly, no one was dead. Clara made her way to where Patrick sat, standing over him with her rifle still ready. He looked up at her with eyes that held shock and something else. Maybe respect, maybe just reassessment. "You should have sold," he said, voice tight with pain. "You should have left us alone." "Same thing." He grimaced, shifting position and clearly regretting it. "This doesn't end here. You know that. My brothers—" "Your brothers just watched their entire operation fall apart because you pushed too hard," Clara interrupted. "And they're going to have to explain to everyone who matters why half your men deserted and the other half got beaten by a group of farmers. You think that makes your family look strong? You think that makes people want to work for you?" Patrick was quiet, processing this. She could see him running scenarios, trying to find the angle that let the Rourkes come out ahead. But there wasn't one. They'd gambled everything on breaking the resistance through overwhelming force, and instead had broken themselves against it. "What now?" he asked finally. Clara looked around at the canyon, at the defenders gathering in small groups, at the wounded being tended, at the evidence of violence that would mark this place for years. What now indeed? "Now we figure out how to live after this," she said. The territorial marshal arrived 3 days later, having been summoned by multiple reports of armed conflict and corruption. He was an older man named Raymond Cooper, with the kind of weathered competence that suggested he'd seen most things human beings were capable of and wasn't impressed by much anymore. He interviewed everyone separately: defenders, surrendered Rourke men, townspeople, even Thomas Garrett, who provided detailed accounts of the Rourke's various illegal activities documented through his store records. The investigation took over a week, Cooper methodically assembling a picture of what had really been happening in the territory. Clara spent that week in a strange state of suspended animation, not quite believing it was over, waiting for the next attack that never came. The Rourke brothers had pulled back completely, Patrick still recovering from his wound, his siblings apparently deciding that continuing to push was a losing proposition. Sheriff Dalton had resigned, and left the territory entirely. No one seemed particularly sorry to see him go. When Cooper finally delivered his findings, he gathered everyone in the town hall, an unusual move that suggested he wanted his conclusions to be public and undeniable. "I've reviewed all the evidence," he said, standing at the front of the packed room, talked to witnesses, examined property damage, looked at financial records. He paused, letting the tension build. "And what I've found is a pattern of systematic intimidation, property destruction, and corruption spanning several years." Clara felt Ethan's hand find hers under the table, squeezing once. "The Rourke family has been operating outside the law with the cooperation of local law enforcement," Cooper continued. "They've used violence and economic pressure to force sales, destroyed property, and created an environment where honest people couldn't survive without submitting to their control." Patrick Rourke, present despite his injury, remained impassive. His brothers looked less controlled, angry, but unable to do anything about it. "However," Cooper said, and Clara's stomach dropped at that word, "I've also found that the response to this situation, while understandable, exceeded what could be strictly considered self-defense. Organizing armed resistance, coordinating attacks on Rourke property, and staging an ambush all fall into gray areas legally." "Gray areas," Anna repeated, voice hard. "We were fighting for our lives." "I understand that, and I'm taking it into account." Cooper's expression was sympathetic but firm. "But the law isn't always about right and wrong. Sometimes it's about what can be proven and what precedents we want to set." The room erupted in angry voices. Cooper let it go for a moment, then raised his hand for silence. "What I'm recommending is this," he said. "The Rourke family will cease all aggressive actions against independent ranchers. They'll pay restitution for documented property damage, and they'll sell off portions of their holdings to make room for the smaller operations they've been squeezing out." "And us?" Mary asked. "What happens to us?" "You've been cleared of any criminal wrongdoing. What you did was organize mutual defense in the absence of effective law enforcement. That's not a crime." Cooper looked directly at the Rourkes. "But it also means that if any further incidents occur, if anyone mysteriously gets burned out or shot or driven away, I'll be back. And next time, I won't be nearly as understanding about the response." It wasn't justice, not really. The Rourkes got to keep most of their empire, just with slightly less territory. They'd pay fines that would barely dent their wealth, and they'd walk away without prison time or serious consequences. But they'd also lost something more valuable than money. They'd lost their reputation for invincibility. Everyone in the territory had seen them defeated, seen their men desert, seen their carefully constructed power structure crumble. That was a wound that wouldn't heal easily. After the meeting, as people dispersed, Patrick approached Clara. His arm was in a sling and he moved carefully, but his eyes held that calculating intelligence she'd learned to watch for. "You won," he said. Not bitter exactly, but acknowledging reality. "We survived," Clara corrected. "That's not the same thing." "Close enough." He glanced around, making sure they weren't being overheard. "For what it's worth, you were right. We pushed too hard, got used to people backing down, didn't know how to handle it when someone pushed back." "Is this an apology?" "This is an admission." Patrick adjusted his sling. "My family's going to pull back like Cooper ordered. Not because we want to, but because continuing costs more than it's worth now. But don't mistake that for surrender. We're still here, still powerful, just operating within different boundaries." "I can live with that," Clara said. "Can you?" "Because from where I stand, you've just made yourself the person everyone looks to. Every rancher in trouble, every dispute that needs settling, they're going to come to you. That's a weight most people can't carry." Clara thought about that, about the responsibility she'd somehow acquired without meaning to. He wasn't wrong. The past month had transformed her from a struggling rancher into something else, a leader, whether she wanted the title or not. "I'll figure it out," she said. Patrick smiled slightly. "I believe you will. Just remember, being the one everyone counts on means you can't afford to fail. Ever. That's a harder burden than fighting." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her to process that uncomfortable truth. The rebuilding took months. The Brennan brothers got their house reconstructed with help from everyone in the alliance, working in shifts to get it livable before winter. Mary's barn was repaired, better than it had been before. The Reeves family replaced their wool stores and expanded their operation. And Clara's property, the ranch that had been on the edge of collapse when this all started, slowly came back to life. The irrigation system Ethan had built held through the summer. The herd grew as they could finally afford to buy more cattle without fear of losing them to sabotage. The land itself seemed to recover, responding to the lifting of constant pressure. But the real change was harder to quantify. The ranchers who'd fought together remained connected, helping each other with labor and resources, sharing information and coordination. They'd proven something important, that cooperation could work, that individuals didn't have to face everything alone. Thomas Garrett extended credit to everyone who needed it to recover, never once asking for early repayment. Some of the townspeople who'd watched from the sidelines started speaking up about other problems, other injustices they'd been tolerating. The territory slowly started to become a place where people could build lives instead of just surviving them. Clara and Ethan found a rhythm too. The careful distance they'd maintained at the beginning had eroded completely, worn away by shared danger and mutual dependence until what remained was something neither of them had expected, a partnership that had somehow become more. They didn't talk about it directly for a long time, just existed in the same space, working side by side, making decisions together, gradually building something that looked like a life instead of just a survival strategy. One evening, 6 months after the canyon fight, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over land that finally felt secure. The herd grazed in the distance, healthy and growing. The fields showed green where water flowed properly again. The barn they'd rebuilt stood solid and square. "You ever think about what we'd be doing if none of this had happened?" Clara asked. Ethan considered the question. "I'd probably be drifting, trying to find work that didn't exist, getting older and more bitter." He looked at her. "What about you?" "Failing slowly. Watching everything my father built fall apart around me until I had to sell or starve." She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "Not a great alternative for either of us." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "You know what I think about sometimes? How this started as necessity, an arrangement. Two people who needed something from each other and were desperate enough to gamble on strangers. And now? Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." He said it simply, without drama, just stating a fact. "This place, these people, it's become more than I expected, more than I knew I needed." Clara felt something warm and complicated bloom in her chest. They'd been through fire together, literally and figuratively, had seen each other at their worst and best, had built something that started as transaction but had somehow transformed into something real. "I'm glad you answered that advertisement," she said quietly. "I'm glad you placed it." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, neither needing to say more. Some things didn't require words. Some partnerships spoke for themselves through action and time, and choosing each other again and again when easier options existed. A year after the canyon fight, Clara stood in almost the same spot where she'd first seen Ethan ride in, on the porch of a house that was now undeniably theirs, watching the horizon with different eyes than she'd had then. The ranch had transformed. Where there had been dry fields, water now flowed reliably through the system they'd expanded and improved. Where there had been a depleted herd, healthy cattle grazed across recovering land. Where there had been a collapsed barn, a new structure stood, stronger, better designed, built by people who'd learned from past failures. But more than the physical changes, something else had shifted. The territory itself felt different. The Rourkes were still around, still wealthy, still powerful, but they operated within constraints now, aware that pushing too hard would bring consequences they couldn't control. Other families had moved in, bought land that had been abandoned, started operations that might actually succeed now that cooperation was possible. Mary Henderson had taken to organizing regular meetings of the ranchers, discussing shared challenges and solutions. Anna Reeves had expanded into wool trading, creating connections with buyers in other territories. The alliance they'd formed in desperation had evolved into something more sustainable, a community that looked out for its own. And Clara herself had changed more than she'd thought possible. The frightened woman who'd married a stranger out of desperation felt like a different person now. She'd learned things about herself she hadn't known, that she could lead when necessary, fight when required, make impossible choices, and live with the consequences. She'd also learned that strength didn't mean facing everything alone, that asking for help wasn't weakness, that the right partner could make you better without making you less yourself. Ethan emerged from the barn, carrying their daughter on his hip. She was 4 months old, named Catherine after Clara's mother, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything with solemn intelligence. She was fussing, he said, climbing the porch steps. Thought some fresh air might help. Clara took the baby, settling her against her shoulder where she immediately quieted. You're getting good at that. Practice. He sat down beside them. Mary stopped by earlier while you were in town. Wanted to know if we'd host the next meeting. Here? Said our place has become the center anyway. Might as well make it official. He glanced at her. What do you think? Clara looked out at the land they'd fought for, the life they'd built, the future they were creating. Hosting meetings meant responsibility, meant being the place people came with problems. It meant continuing to lead in ways that were sometimes exhausting, but it also meant being part of something larger than themselves, meant contributing to a community that had literally saved their lives. Tell her yes, Claire said. We'll host. As the sun set over the property, painting everything in gold and orange, Clara thought about the path that had brought them here. The fear and desperation, the violence and uncertainty, the impossible choices and unexpected alliances, the way survival had somehow transformed into something more, into building, into growing, into creating something that might actually last. She thought about her father, about his stubborn refusal to give up even when giving up would have been easier. She'd thought it was pride then, couldn't understand why he wouldn't just sell and find peace somewhere else. But she understood now. It wasn't about the land itself, not really. It was about refusing to let fear make your decisions, about drawing lines and standing behind them even when standing was difficult, about believing that some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight seemed unwinnable. Her father had lost that fight eventually, worn down by the same forces that had nearly broken Clara. But she'd picked up where he left off, found allies where he'd stood alone, and somehow managed to win what he couldn't, not through being stronger or smarter or better, but through understanding something he hadn't, that winning didn't mean defeating your enemies completely. It meant making yourself strong enough that attacking you cost more than it was worth. It meant building something sustainable rather than something perfect. Catherine made a small sound, pulling Clara back to the present. The baby was watching the sunset with wide eyes, processing colors and light with that intense focus infants had. What do you think she sees? Ethan asked. Hopefully a future that's better than our past, Clara said. A place where she doesn't have to fight the same battles we did. That's the goal, isn't it? Each generation makes things slightly better, fights different battles, solves problems so their kids don't have to. Think we managed it? I think we made a start. He put his arm around her shoulders, careful not to disturb the baby. The rest is just keeping at it. Every day, every choice, every time we decide to build instead of destroy. Clara leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the weight of their daughter between them, the land stretching out around them in the gathering dark. This wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd placed that advertisement. Wasn't the future she'd dreamed about as a child or planned for as a young woman. It was harder, more complicated. Came with scars and memories that would never fully heal. But it was real, built through blood and sweat and terror and stubbornness, earned rather than given. And somehow, impossibly, it was enough. More than enough. The stars emerged one by one as night settled over the territory. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. A nightbird called out. The wind moved through grass that was finally growing again after years of drought and neglect. Clara stood, shifting Catherine to her other shoulder, and moved to the edge of the porch. Ethan joined her, both of them looking out at the darkness that no longer felt threatening. You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come? Clara asked. If you turned around that first day? Sometimes. But then I remember I didn't turn around, and neither did you. We made choices that brought us here. He looked at her. That's all anyone does, really. Make choices and live with them. Try to make the next choice better than the last one. You think we're making good choices? I think we're making our choices. Trying to do right by the people who count on us. That's about all anyone can ask. He paused. You have regrets? Clara thought about it honestly. About the violence and fear. About the people who'd been hurt. About the weight of responsibility she now carried. About all the ways this could have gone differently. No, she said finally. Not about the important things. They stood together as night deepened around them, a family formed from necessity that had somehow become something more. The ranch continued its slow recovery behind them. The community they'd helped build carried on with its work. The future remained uncertain, as futures always were. But for tonight, standing on land they'd fought for with people they'd chosen, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. That was too simple for what they'd been through. But a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she needed to be, with exactly who she needed to be with. Catherine stirred and made another small sound. Clara looked down at her daughter's face, at the life they'd somehow created in the middle of chaos and conflict. "Come on," she said to Ethan. "Let's get her inside. Tomorrow's going to be busy." "Tomorrow's always busy," he said, but he was smiling as he followed her into the house. Behind them, the land stretched out dark and vast under a sky full of stars. The same land that had nearly killed them. The same land they'd fought for. The same land they'd continue to work every day, building something that might last beyond them. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was theirs. And that was enough.